I've been hallucinating since I was 11 years old. I'm 22 now, fresh out of college here in the middle of Wyoming. I got my bachelor's in education with a major in fine arts, which is where this story starts. But unfortunately, not where it ends. I was a sophomore in college when we got medication that would actually work for me. My doctor and I had tried multiple prescriptions before we found the golden ticket. Aripiprazole. Amplify for short. The meds helped a lot. However, they didn't completely quell the hallucinations. I would still see things out of the corner of my eyes or in the shadows of a dark room. With the help of Amplify, they don't scare me. At least, they didn't. I live in a one-bedroom apartment alone. I got the place back in May, right after I graduated and left my claustrophobic dorm room. Anyway, it's now November, meaning I've been living here for 6 months. One of my biggest fears I've had regarding my hallucinations is seeing someone I know deformed and mutilated. I'm also afraid of seeing huge bugs or uncanny animals. Somehow, through some graceful turn of fate, none of them came true. But what I've experienced is much more terrifying. Back in late September, a friend of mine, Delilah, crashed over for the night. She was my roommate in college for 3 out of 4 years. That being said, she knows all about my hallucinations and my issue with the antipsychotics I've been on. As the night was closing in, she asked me if I had an extra set of sheets for the air mattress I was letting her use. I made my way to the bedroom to look for it, as I knew I had one somewhere. I looked in the closet, but there were only old boxes of some crap I had never unpacked. I thought about the space under my bed. Surely it was under there. Where else would I put something I thought I'd never use? I walked to my bed, getting on my knees with the purpose to search. I let my hands hit the cold wood. I tucked my hair behind my ear and tilted my head to be eye level with the blackness in between the box spring and the floor. My eyes wandered through the space until they met with someone else's. Mine. I whipped my head up as quick as my neck would support, banging my head on the metal bars of my bed frame. Delilah called from a couple rooms over asking if everything was all right and if I had found the sheets. I told her everything was fine and that no, I hadn't. Still on my knees, I started at the floor. I rubbed my head with my hand. She was smiling. This was the first time I had hallucinated myself. At the start of October, I got a new and honestly better job. I would be a high school drawing teacher. My students and I would be working mainly with charcoal and graphite. I was extremely excited as this was the job I had always envisioned for myself. I was told the former teacher had to resign. Why, I wasn't too sure of. I was 6 days into my position when I saw it again. I got home around 4 in the afternoon and I was eager to take some sort of power nap. As easy as it may seem, teaching was exhausting. I lay down on my bed. I thought of my day, the kids, and my lunch. This was exactly the life I wanted. I put my phone on my side table, but immediately thought it would be better to charge it as I slept. I dropped my head off the side of my bed, allowing for my hair to touch the floor. It was getting quite long. I felt the charger between my fingers, but as I was bringing it up, I dropped the cable back onto the floor. I turned to look at the charger. I noticed pieces of hair on it that certainly weren't mine. I trailed my eyes down, following the strands. She was peeking out from underneath the bed. I could only see her eyes, but holy crap, were they the worst thing I have ever seen. I turned my whole body back onto the bed. I shut my eyes as tightly as I could, inwardly reminding myself that it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But she had my eyes. The exact same color and the exact same shape. I counted to 5, taking slow, deep breaths. I hesitantly opened my eyes, looking very carefully to where she had just been. She was gone. I would see her from time to time while at work, or the gym, or anywhere, really. Just quick flashes of her wide smile. Recently, I saw her as I was teaching a class of juniors. I had just started telling them about the art history course I was required to take in college. One of my students piped up and he asked how boring the class had been. I smiled at him, preparing myself to give him the appropriate answer. I looked past him to the back of the room. Usually my hallucinations tend to be vague outlines and silhouettes, no defining features, no nothing, just shapes and shadows. She, however, was not. She stood at my height near the door. I could see her in full. Same hair, same eyes, same nose, mouth, and somehow the exact same clothes I had been wearing that day. A white t-shirt with brown slacks. Her grin was inhumanly large. I stumbled over my response to the student. At that moment, I felt like I had never felt fear before. I was unexplainably scared. But as soon as I blinked, she was gone. I invited Delilah over that upcoming weekend. I couldn't be alone. Not with her. Me. These hallucinations were getting out of control. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor to get my prescription either changed completely or to a higher dosage. When Friday rolled around, I opted to stay in my car that was parked in the teacher lot. No way was I going back into my apartment alone. I stayed there for 2 hours, watching my phone die as I scrolled on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just anything to keep the other me out of my mind. Delilah texted me around 5:30 that she was on her way. I drove home. I felt insane. What was happening? Why was now the time my meds stopped working? Were they just becoming less effective? My mind raced 1,000 thoughts at once as I pulled up to my apartment. Delilah was outside, a smile on her face. "How are the kids today?" I smiled weakly in response. I unlocked the door and the two of us walked inside. After some catching up, I got to the point. "You know how I see things?" Delilah quirked her head as if confused. "Yeah, are they getting worse?" I guess I'm not too sure what's going on with them," I said, embarrassment creeping its way up my cheeks. She nodded in understanding. "Here, let me make you a drink. It's the weekend anyway." She trailed off, her voice getting softer as she stood up and walked through the hallway and into the kitchen. I sat there in uneasy silence. My appointment is in a week, which isn't soon enough. I felt like the meds were working, but obviously they're not. Why did it have to be me? Why couldn't I hallucinate a cute puppy following me around, or a regular person that wasn't me? Delilah came back from the kitchen, 2 glasses in hand. When our eyes met, her face twisted with confusion. "Hey, how did you get in here so fast?" she asked, setting down a glass on either side of the coffee table. "I never left the couch," I replied, taking my drink in hand. She looked even more confused. "What? I just passed you in the hall." She chuckled as she said this. I saw something move behind her. It was me. No, this wasn't a hallucination. This was a real, tangible person. "You know it's not nice to lie," she laughed. "Delilah," I whispered. "Aren't you going to try your drink? I just picked what you had in your fridge, so I'm sure you'll like it." "Delilah," I said, as the other me came closer to her. "And I do know you like your alcohol if your 21st says anything." "Delilah, please," I begged, wishing she'd stop talking. She did, and finally looked behind her. She could see her too. With no warning, the other me brought her hands out, one hand at the top of Delilah's head, the other on her jaw. I screamed out, and so did Delilah. The other me smiled, a small, menacing curve of the lips. I closed my eyes, terrified of what was about to happen. In the dark of my eyelids, I heard it. The snap. I opened my eyes in a fit of panic. Delilah was splayed out across the floor of my living room. My drink was staining my carpet. In my fear, I had dropped the glass. Her head was facing the ceiling, but so was her back. I felt sick to my stomach, trying to keep the bile from making its way up. I quickly darted my eyes through the layout, trying to find the other me. I never did. It's been some time since all of this went down. I called the police, and they've started a whole investigation. And although I don't think they fully believed me, someone else's fingertips were found on Delilah. I've started cleaning out my apartment, moving some stuff to my parents. I can't stay in this apartment. I just can't. I ended up moving my bed to another corner of my room during the process. In the mess of dust and old tattered blankets that have been wasting away under my bed, I saw a folded set of sheets. This leads me to today. I saw her peeking through my window a few hours ago. Why won't she leave me alone? I don't know what I did to deserve it, but please, God, I hope she goes away. I just want her to go away. I've worked in kitchens all my life. I was a porter straight out of high school, working the dishes at a small Italian restaurant. I made my way through culinary school, interning as a junior chef at a hotel grill in Minneapolis. Over time, I worked pretty much every position there is in a kitchen. Expediter, saucier, sous chef. I even had a short run as an executive chef at a hotel in downtown Milwaukee. In 2014, I got a job at a place called Charcuteria Nobre. It was a high-end Portuguese restaurant known for their amazing cured meats. I think they've been featured on one of those travel shows. You know, the one with the tall guy. I can never remember the name. Within a month, I was assigned to the butcher station. I worked almost exclusively with one of the most famous pieces of the restaurant, the presunto de barrancos. We served this amazing dish with a hijoji da sierra costini and a fig compote. Probably one of the best dishes I've ever worked with. Over time, I got good enough to work the station in my sleep. Dado, the executive chef, took notice. Within a couple of months, I was promoted to sous chef. As the second in command, I mainly organized the other stations and made sure all relevant information was relayed. But I always returned to the meat station. Cutting the presunto was, and always would be, my job. I was happy there. There's something amazing about doing something you're good at and seeing the labor put a smile on someone's face. Running a kitchen is an absolute pain in the butt most of the time, but Charcuteria Nobre was a home away from home. We were planning for a particularly busy night. Dado was running back and forth like a madman, blaring like a siren. One of our deliveries had been stuck in customs for 2 days, and our reserves were running out. Add to that a particular set of high-end clients who were expected to show up, and you got a recipe for disaster. I was doing inventory with the pastry chef when Dado came in and took me by the arm. He gave the pastry chef a look that she knew all too well. She promptly left the room. "Are you good?" Dado asked. "Are you good to work?" "What do you need?" They called. They want to order off menu. Special order. "All right, is it a substitution or..." No, not quite. Another dish. They want to feel important. "You got this?" "Dado, I'm not sure." "You got this." He pressed a piece of paper to my chest and waited. I sighed and accepted it. He pulled me in for one of his trademark hugs, kisses my forehead, and patted my cheek. "I love you. Do great work." Most of the orders were from the menu, but there was a particular item that stood out to me. Ameijoas a bulejo pato, a style of Portuguese clam cooked with coriander, white wine, and drenched in garlic. It's an acquired taste, but to a particular palate, it could be divine. We had 4 orders and little time to make it happen. Dado was counting on me, so I got to work. It'd be done by the time they arrived. It took me a trip to the fish market and a call to a sommelier friend of mine, but I made it happen. Later that night, as the guests arrived, I had everything ready. The fish station helped me prepare everything, and I arranged the presentation myself. Before sending it out, Dotto stopped to do quality control. He took one sip with his tasting spoon, frowned, and nodded. "Is perfect," he nodded. "Good. I love you." Having Dotto say little or nothing was always the best outcome. It was when he had a lot to say that you were in trouble. Once our prestigious guests had finished their meal, I saw one of our servers come back to speak with Dotto. I could hear him halfway across the kitchen, right past all the pots and pans. No, Dotto said. "Not me. Don't care." He pointed at me across the room. The server came over with a big smile on her face. "They want to see the chef," she said, "and yes, they're big tippers." I washed my hands and slipped out of the kitchen, following the server to the reserve table. There were 4 guests in total, all with the same order. There were 2 men in their mid-50s, dressed in a kind of business casual. Between them was a woman in her mid-60s. She didn't seem to have any qualms about showing off her vast jewelry or her intricately detailed hair. And finally, there was a very old woman. She could easily have been in her 90s, wispy white hair carefully brushed and styled. She had these bright green eyes that almost shone. The moment I approached, she locked her eyes to mine. It felt like a lion staring me down, considering me for a meal. And then she smiled. Her gums were completely black, like she'd been chewing tar or something. Her teeth were bright white and impeccable, something I'd never seen in a woman her age. The party turned to me with an appreciative clap. The bejeweled woman offered me her hand, and I took it. "Thank you so much for your efforts," she smiled. "It is rare to be treated with such reverence." The 2 men agreed, nodding to each other. "Mama knows her cuisine," said one of them. "If she says it's good, added the other. Finally, the eyes fell on the matriarch at the table. With one finger, she waved me over. As I approached, she painstakingly got up from her chair. The others were ready to step in, but she held up a hand. They stopped immediately. She reached out towards me, and I took her hand gently. She smiled at me with those death-black gums. "We will come back." A voice that carried decades of smoking. And although it was a promise, it felt more like a threat. They'd come back about once every 3 weeks the following months. Every time, their requests would get more peculiar or specific. Cozido à portuguesa, arroz de cabidela, salted codfish, deep-fried pork ears, cow stomach lining. Once we were asked to serve roasted goat kid. It took me ages to get the sarabolo texture just right. Dotto had other things to deal with and asked me to officially make them my table. I couldn't say no. Each time they came by, they tipped me at least a day's salary. They'd rant and rave about the dishes, and the evening would always end the same way. A firm handshake by the woman at the table and a thank you. I can't say I disliked it, but there was something about the oiled black gums of the old woman that just gave me the creeps. It was turning into late autumn. Leaves had long since shifted color, and the trees were just a few weeks from dropping them completely. There was that musky smell of moist earth in the air, and people had brought out their winter gear. Dotto had started to wear his handcrafted Italian fedora, which was the official signal that winter was just around the bend. I've been prepping for days to get the next dish right. I never worked with lamprey before, and I can't say it was very pleasant. It's like the offspring of an eel in a garbage disposal wrapped in a rubber tube. But still, I did what had to be done. They want arroz de lamprilla? They get it. Sauce, rice, and a fantastic red wine. That night, I was out helping Dotto bring in some boxes for the freezer. When we finished, we stayed on the loading dock to have a smoke. Dotto usually offered me a cigarillo on calm nights, and this was looking to be one of them. "You know who they are?" he asked, nodding at the restaurant. "No idea," I admitted. "But with money like that, they don't need to say their names. But with money like that, they don't need to say their names. But with money like that, they don't need to say their names. But with money like that, they don't need to say their names." "Machado," Dotto nodded. "Big family. They run, Copper mines. He finished his cigarillo and stomped it out. Do not disappoint. Never would. I know. I love you. I was a bit nervous about sending out my arroz de lamprilla, but I think I nailed it. It's hard to tell you've done something right when you haven't worked with that ingredient before, but I trusted my team and palate, and Dotto gave me the go-ahead. I kept my head down and worked the presunto in the meantime, hoping for the best. Not long after, like clockwork, the server came to fetch me. You're up, she said. They're eager. That time as I approached, they all got up from their chairs. It startled me a little, which seemed to amuse them. When the old woman joined them, I got a short burst of applause. Our savior, smiled the woman in her 60s. Magnificent, added one of the men. And finally, the old woman in the back took my hands, smiled at me with her death-black gums, and said, Join us, please. I looked back at Dotto, who approved. I could use a break. The family officially introduced themselves as the Machados. The two men were Cristo and Caesar, sons of the woman in her 60s, Erica. She, in turn, was the daughter of the matriarch, Octavia. They poured me a glass of wine and congratulated me on another dish well served. I insisted that I couldn't take all the credit, but they wouldn't hear it. Mama has worked in plenty of kitchens, said Caesar. She knows a good job when she sees it. A pro is a pro, emphasized Cristo. You're an artist. Octavia, on the other hand, just stared at me. It felt like those green eyes would pierce right through me. She glanced back at Erica, who nodded in understanding. Octavia cleared her throat, and the table fell silent. I'm getting old, she said. It takes time to get out like this. Can you cook for me? Out of something resembling instinct, I said no. I didn't even consider it. The Machados were perfectly pleasant, but there was something about them that just didn't sit well with me. They were almost too pleasant. Then they explained. It would be a part-time thing, once a month. They would provide the recipe and ingredients, and I would have free reign in their vast kitchen to make it. One night a month, and they'd pay me the equivalent of an entire week. Tax-free, of course. Hush, hush. Octavia wouldn't take no for an answer. Erica and her sons insisted on how much they loved my work and how they wanted to introduce me to the rest of their family. They swore I would want for nothing, and that if I asked, they could open any number of doors to any number of restaurants worldwide. I haven't even noticed Dotto approaching the table. At first, I thought he'd give me crap for having a glass of wine, but no, he patted me on the back. For esteemed guests, he has my blessing, Dotto smiled. He'll do great work. With that, I couldn't say no. Dotto was invited to the table, and he stuck around to speak some Portuguese with Octavia. I knew a few words, but I was far from fluent. I just sat back and observed. Having known Dotto for years, I could tell when something affected him, and there was something the old woman said that made him visibly nervous. Dotto doesn't get nervous. Later that night, as we closed up, I asked him about it. At first, he seemed reluctant to answer. He put on his hat, adjusted his coat, and took a deep puff of his cigarello. It doesn't translate well, he said. But that woman? He shook his head. She's the devil. From that point on, I spent every last Sunday of the month with the Machados. I'd prepared all kinds of traditional Portuguese dishes alongside their house staff. And yeah, they had house staff. The Machados had a huge place on the outskirts of town. Had a proper gate and everything. I always felt like I was in a spy movie driving up there, having to check in at the guardhouse. The house itself wasn't that big in relation to the surrounding yard. It was 2 stories and had a vast wine cellar. It was the first thing Erica showed me on the house tour. It looked to be a refurbished turn-of-the-century mansion, and you could tell it'd seen better days, but I was still impressed. Family photos lined the walls, along with pictures from various achievements. Signing a contract with the Hatchet Investment Group, meeting the president, sitting in at the Nobel Prize dinner. There were always shifting faces in the center of the picture, but you could always spot Octavia in the background. Didn't matter if it was Caesar or Christo standing in front of the camera, you could tell who was really pulling the strings. Autumn turned to winter. At the first snowfall, I got a call from Erica. "We have a business dinner coming up next week," she said. "We need something special." "All right, what do you need?" I said, scrambling to get a pen and paper. "We have very rare and precious meat coming in," she said. "I don't know the name, something Portuguese." "Can you read off the box? It would really help." "Mother wants it simple," she said. "Oven bake it, add a sauce. You can come by and inspect it." "You have it?" I asked. "Can you send me a picture?" So she did. I had no idea what I was looking at. It looked like the leg of a horse, but slightly smaller. It was completely black and skinless, and there were blotches of blue staining the freezer they'd put it in. In the place where one might expect a hoof, it instead had this mass of spaghetti-like frills. Running up the side of it, I spotted what looked like barnacle mouths. That was no fish, and it was no animal I'd ever cooked. I thought there was something wrong with the picture, like a lighting thing. I asked Erica to send me another, and she did. Same thing, other angle. What in the world was that? The Machados were very busy, and I couldn't manage to drop by to see the meat for myself. Instead, I had to wait for the day of the cook. I had no idea what to bring, and after several texts from Erica, I resigned myself to just accept that I was going in blind. Driving up there, I noticed about a dozen cars in the driveway. Some people were standing outside smoking, others were lounging in the nearby gazebo. All of them were dressed in combinations of black and gray, men and women of all adult ages, all dressed up. The moment I stepped out of my car, Caesar was there to greet me. He shook my hand and led me inside, talking as we went. "The meat is for guests only," he said. "No taste testing." "Well, then how can I—" "No questions, no tasting, none. Understood?" I nodded as we squeezed past two men going out for a smoke. Caesar could be pushy, but this time he was outright demanding. This was a clearly big night for him. As we got to the kitchen, he handed me a pair of gloves. I didn't immediately put them on, but he gave me this cold stare until I did. "Those stay on," he said, "until you're done." "Sure thing." "So what rules are we up to?" "No tasting, gloves stay on." "That's right." We rounded the kitchen island and went past the pantry. They had a small walk-in freezer which Caesar had the keys to. He unlocked the door, went inside, and waved me along. "If it is expensive, you shouldn't freeze it," I said. "I could have—" "It's not frozen." Caesar interrupted. "It doesn't freeze." The box was bigger than I'd anticipated. It was made of this green aluminum-reinforced plastic casing with some kind of icebox interior. The label clearly said carne azulgrura, which I believe can be translated as something like blue cave meat. Up close, it looked even more alien. There was a heat coming off of it, causing plumes of steam to rise from the box. It was clear that it was a limb of some kind, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Were the frills the foot or the hip? "Every portion should be fist-sized," Caesar continued. "Oven baked, no longer than 40 minutes. Use whatever you see fit for garnish and side dishes." "How am I supposed to work with it if I can't taste it?" "Look!" Caesar put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. He talked to me using his full hand, never letting up with the eye contact. "Not your concern," he said. "You bake it, you serve it. Make the best of it. Okay?" "Okay," I nodded. "Yeah, Okay. And no tasting." As he left me alone with the box, a thought hit me. I brought up my phone and compared the images that Erica had sent me. It wasn't the box that was bigger. It was the meat. Had it grown? Working with the house staff, I could tell they were anxious. There were close to 25 guests in total, some Portuguese, some American, all ridiculously wealthy. The tires on their cars probably cost more than my apartment. But I did as I was told. I kept my gloves on, and I had the house staff help me unbox the meat. We laid it all out, and I started to cut it. I was surprised to learn just how soft it was. There was literally no bone. There was something resembling thick lines of cartilage, but it was on the outside of the meat. I could pull it off like a thick string, with some effort leaving something akin to fillets to be harvested. The meat was blue all the way through. It dripped these ink-like blots onto the floor that just didn't seem to scrub out. My elbow-high gloves had a lot to live up to. We prepped the meat in fist-sized portions, alongside olive and tuna salad and corn fried rice. As instructed, we oven-baked it for 40 minutes and garnished it with cilantro, oregano, and dried garlic flakes. We plated it with fresh peas for garnish, alongside a house-special virgin olive oil. I have a hard time describing the smell. While raw, it had this strange tinge of ammonia, but when cooked, it was almost completely scentless. But even scentless, there was something about the heat coming off of it that singed my nose. I almost sneezed all over one of the servings and had to excuse myself. Stepping out for a smoke, I saw something peculiar in the backyard. About a dozen men and women, all in their mid-50s, running and playing across the snow-covered yard like excited children. Some singing, some throwing snowballs. There were 2 grown women playing tag, screaming as they sprinted across the yard. I hardly noticed the man directly to my left. "Hey," he said, "you the chef?" A man in his early 60s, full black tie getup, gray hair combed and oiled. I nodded at him, and without a hint of hesitation, he flung his arms around me. "Thank you," he sniffled. "Thank you so much." It was time. As the aperitifs disappeared, the wine glasses were filled, and the plates of carne azulgrura made their way out to cheers and applause. But no one dared touch their plates. I remember standing by the door waiting to be excused. Octavia rose from her chair as the room erupted with stomping feet. "Today, I resign my post," she said. The sound was deafening. Screams and cheers all across the room. Grown men and women screaming like children. I saw a man in his early 70s at the end of one of the tables crying his eyes out. "We dine together. We enjoy the fruit of what is to come. We drown this cycle in joy together." Octavia raised her glass, and the others followed suit. They waited her final words with bated breath. "Io," she said. And throughout the room, the same word bounced off the walls. It was sung, screamed, cried, and praised. An all-encompassing word for all ages and creeds, sung with an unnatural vigor. I could see their eyes widen as they grasped their utensils, forks and knives ferociously cutting into the strange meat, stains of blue pouring out onto their plates, all to a single, unifying chant. "Io, Io, Io." I had to step out. They were getting uncomfortably riled up. Some of them didn't even bother with knife and fork, just stuffing the meat into their faces. Some took their time, savoring it alongside the corn-fried rice. There was this one woman who cut the meat into thin slices, painstakingly wrapping each pea from the garnish in it and savoring it like it was her last meal on this earth. One of the house staffers pulled me aside with a whisper. "Don't look," she said. "It'll get worse." "What the heck is going on?" I whispered. "Stay quiet, take your money, and go," she continued. "Don't make them like you." The rest of the night turned into something else entirely. The guests retreated to one of the lounges. At first, it was just like any other party, drinks, music. Then things started to escalate. I saw a man in his early 30s passionately making out with a woman in her late 70s. There was a whole circle of women just taking turns screaming at and pushing each other. One man just sat by the window reciting an entire book from memory. And then the lights were dimmed. Things got even worse. Some people started undressing right then and there, screams of passion, rage, fear, or just because. In the middle of the room, a group of older men arranged a circle and took turns beating the crap out of each other. There was this one man who took a hit to the temple and went down like a brick. He was spazzing out like he'd gotten a brain hemorrhage of some kind. The others just laughed and kicked him. Even in the dim light, I could see him bleeding out on the expensive carpet. But the screwed up thing, he was laughing too. I retreated to the kitchen, where the house staffers were finishing up the dishes. I was at a loss for words. I pointed back at the corridor leading to the lounge, but they just shrugged. "We should call someone," I yelled. "There's a man bleeding out on the carpet." "Go ahead," one of them said. "Call the police." I brought my phone up and dialed 911 and was about to hit the call button. I looked up, but there were no reactions. No one seemed to care. It gave me a pause. Why aren't you doing anything?" I asked. "Because there are no victims." "Go on. Look again." I did, reluctantly. I went back into the lounge, which had devolved further. There was blood on the carpets and walls, and I could barely see where one body began and another stopped. I could feel hands tugging at me in the dark and hear the snapping of teeth. From somewhere behind me, I could hear the unmistakable sound of fork and knife sliding against one another. That one word, repeated as a mantra. It was screamed, whispered, and moaned, and cried. In unison. Io. I felt like a sheep in a pit of lions. There were threats all around me, and making too much noise would draw their attention. This wasn't just a party, this was something wrong. I started to realize just how much danger I was really in. That feeling sunk into the bottom of my stomach like a stone, leaving my pulse to bounce back and forth up my spine. I didn't even think about looking for a victim or a dead body. I was leaving, and I was calling someone. Screw the money. But as I got to the door, I ran into someone I hadn't anticipated. Octavia. Just her. No one else. No chaperone, no daughters or grandsons. And for some reason, this did little to calm me. I firmly remembered Dotto telling me in no unclear words that this woman was the devil. After seeing what I'd seen, I was inclined to agree. "Come," she said. "You get paid, you can leave." "You can, just send it," I said. "Come," she insisted. "Don't worry." "No, I think I'll," she turned to me, and behind those youthful green eyes, something moved. Like a slight shift in her skull, dropping half of her face half an inch like a melting candle. She flashed me her blackened gums as she gritted through her teeth. "Now." That wasn't the voice of an old woman. And she wasn't asking. I followed her to a private study, an intimate room with hardboard floors and musky furniture. Decades of files and folders, all neatly organized in oak bookshelves. Octavia pointed at a slip of paper on a coffee table, next to a vase of dried blue sunflowers. "Take it." I did. It was my salary for the evening, as agreed upon, rounded up. Octavia picked up a small plate from her desk. "You're diligent," she said. "An eager servant, traditional but flexible." Something in her bones shifted with a crack. I could have sworn I saw her left arm grown an inch longer. "I want you to stay on for longer," she continued. "For my daughter." "I'm, honored," I said. "But I am committed to my job." "This is not a question of work. This is a question of worth." She handed me the plate where a single bite of carne azul remained. "I think you'll like it," she smiled. "Everyone does." "I'm good, thank you." No. One bite won't hurt." "No, thank you." Another audible snapping sound. This time there was no mistake. It was definitely something wrong with her. Her jaw unhinged like a snake, and one of her eyes rolled back in her skull. Something dark started to run out of her nose, and I could see her skin shrivel. It all went so fast, I barely had time to step back. She was still holding the plate out for me. I was about to run when I realized we weren't alone. At least 8 of her guests were standing in the doorway, bawling their eyes out, not from sadness, but an unimaginable joy. No, Octavia muttered. "Oh, no. I could see every flap of her tongue as she tried to form the words, but the words didn't come. She pushed the plate against me, but I hindered every instinct in grabbing it. Instead, it dropped to the floor and shattered. There was a shriek. Some from the guests, some from Octavia. Her guests rushed into the room, pushing me aside. Some threw themselves on the floor, stuffing their faces with whatever drops of sauce they could find. Others headed straight for Octavia. They tore at her, ripping away at her, revealing slouching flesh. Her fragile form laid bare, and they just attacked her, tearing at her hair and skin with barely any effort. It all started to come off. The chance returned as they all descended on her like wild animals. Io! You could see splotches of blue, not red, as they tore her open. It wasn't like butchering an animal. It was like a snake shedding its skin. Io. I heard snapping joints and crackling bones as she grew in stature. From a measly 4'9", something birthed itself from her body. Something at least 9 feet tall, slouching to even fit in the room. Io. Oil slick and blackened blue. What remained of Octavia. Couldn't form words. But it didn't need to. The stench was so strong that I must have gotten a contact high. There were these flashes where I saw myself as if in different worlds. One where I was just a pile of black ooze, barely even resembling a human. Another where I was covered in teeth. One where I was burning in an endless hellscape, screaming from exposed nerve endings. And all through it all, in every existence, in every living nightmare, that chant persisted. I snapped out of it. A single drop of blue had spattered on my cheek. I wiped it off, trying to catch my breath. Octavia, or what remained, was distracted by the pile of guests. I ran. I got to the door when I heard something stumbling behind me. Looking back, I glanced at this massive humanoid clumsily making its way out of the study, throwing guests like paper dolls as it chased after me. It had barely learned to walk, but it already knew that it wanted to chase, to attack. I saw its featureless face, looking more like a strange growth than a head. I made my way down the stairs. I hadn't even realized I was screaming, but the screams just blended in with the rest. For a moment, I sounded like one of them. Just another guest. It didn't even try to get down the stairs. It flung itself forward. It haphazardly tumbled down, almost bowling me over as it crashed against the wall. I had to choose. The front door or kitchen? I chose the kitchen. I could see them lining the rooms. Guests smeared with blue handprints, bruises, and blood. Some with grievous wounds which seemed to close as little blue frills sewed them shut. Some with grievous wounds which seemed to close as little blue frills sewed them shut from the inside. As soon as Octavia revealed herself, There were cheers and praises coming from them. I ran screaming down the hall to the sound of applause. There was no one coming to help. I made my way through the kitchen, throwing myself past the kitchen. throwing myself past the kitchen island. There were 3 house staffers there who didn't seem to understand what was going on. The moment Octavia stepped through the door, everything changed. They turned to run to keep up with me. This was not part of their plan. This was far beyond the paycheck or anything else. Decadence was one thing, but this? No. I didn't stop to look, but I heard bones break, joints snap. I heard one scream cut off as something heavy was thrown across the room. Reaching the backyard, I just kept running. Looking back one final time, I could see Octavia being swarmed by her guests. They held her back, hugged her, kissed her, and caressed her, like a swarm of maggots piling on a wound. The last thing I saw of her, of that mansion, was that 9-foot-tall monstrosity standing tall, swarmed by insignificant maggot people. It did not care for them. It wanted to hunt. I made my way to the end of the estate and managed to climb up the fence. I just kept going, crying my way all the way to the highway somewhere around 3 a.m. I almost wandered into oncoming traffic, only to be picked up by a newspaper van. So, yeah. I called the police. It turns out, the family had called ahead about this being awake for their late grandmother. For all intents and purposes, it seems like the world had already registered Octavia Machado as being deceased. I tried to skirt around the insane details of that night, instead focusing on the missing house staffers. But since they were all there illegally and not being paid on the record, there was little to no enthusiasm in investigating it further. I tried. I really tried. But after having Christo and Caesar making a house visit, making it known in no small terms that they'd destroy my life if I even looked at a police car, I had little choice but to stay quiet. They even reminded me to cash my check. The family moved earlier this year, which is why I can finally share this with the world. I've moved since as well, and they won't find me anytime soon. I just want you to be aware of the kind of people you're dealing with. There's another level of their depravity, and I don't know how to live with it. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know. And I don't want to know. If there's anything that can be said that would make this feel normal, I don't want anything to do with it. If you remember anything from this, anything at all, I hope it's this. Don't eat the blue meat. When I was getting started, an actor I knew gave me some really good advice. While deciding whether or not to take a certain role, consider 3 factors: the money, the show, and the people. If at least 2 of those things are good, accept the job. If they're paying you well and you love the play, you won't mind putting up with crappy people. If it's a great show with a cast full of friends, but you're not getting paid so well, that's still all right. It'll be artistically fulfilling. If it's a bad show, but you love the cast and you're making money, you'll probably have the time of your life making fun of the playwright backstage and laughing all the way to the bank. What my friend failed to mention is that as an aspiring actor, you don't usually get to be that picky. When I got a call from my agent that a production of The Back High was urgently seeking a new chorus member, all I could see were dollar signs. My survival job had just fallen through. The family that I nannied for was moving upstate, insisting that Manhattan had just gotten too dangerous for their toddler, and my savings were only going to cover my rent for another month. It was raining the day of my audition, and my train got delayed. I showed up panting. I had to run from the subway station, and my hair was a disaster. In the Bacchae, the chorus is full of, well, Bacchae. Fervent followers of Dionysus, wild women drunk and running throughout the countryside. In the climax of the play, they crowd the protagonist in a frenzy, literally ripping him limb from limb. I'll never know if it was my frantic energy from barely making it to the theater on time or my actual acting. My costume fitting was the next day. They weren't kidding about urgently needing a replacement, which thrilled me because I wasn't kidding about urgently needing the money. At the fitting, I discovered something my agent failed to mention about the production. This wasn't just any version of the Bacchae. It was a recreation, an attempt to perform the play in the traditional Greek style. In other words, everyone was wearing masks. I've never been fond of masks. We had to do a few assignments with them in my college acting courses. Covering your face can enhance the physicality of your bodies, something like that. But I don't know, I never liked wearing them or seeing other people wearing them. It wouldn't be fair to call it a full-on fear. But the stiffness, the lack of expression, gives me a weird feeling in my stomach. And wearing one, your field of vision is limited. Your mouth covered, making it harder to breathe, harder to project your voice. I don't like it. It's as simple as that. But I needed the money. My costume wasn't ugly per se, just strange. A long white dress, or maybe toga is a better word. The fabric about the thickness of a burlap sack. My mask, stark white. Paper mache, covering my entire face except for my eyes. The mouth carved to imitate a grin. No shoes. My hair tucked into a wild black wig. We wore wigs, they explained to me, so the chorus could be identical, indistinguishable. We moved as one, spoke as one, and were meant to look like one. They even made sure to cast women of the same height. In our costumes, it was impossible to tell which of us was which. It didn't help that I was an outsider to the rest of the cast, joining the show weeks into rehearsals. Everyone seemed annoyed that they had to teach me the blocking, the inflection of the lines so my voice didn't stick out from the other chorus girls, and where to go backstage during scenes with no chorus. A few people tried to be nice to me, but quickly gave up when they realized I knew nothing about Greek theater, or masked theater, or the avant-garde. My last show had been a regional production of Cats, for Pete's sake. I was totally out of my element. Things got especially sour when I tried to ask what happened to the girl I was replacing. Nobody wanted to talk about it. People gasped when I brought it up. The clearest answer I got was a whispered, hesitant, "She fell." But the person wouldn't elaborate any further. The cast seemed superstitious, uncomfortable, like talking about her would cause them to suffer her fate, removal from the show. And it was clear that, aside from me, everyone else loved this show. The actor playing Dionysus, the couple of times he deigned to talk to me, just kept gushing about how honored he was to play this role, how electrifying it felt to put his history minor to use, to show people a piece of the world's theatrical beginnings. I thought the show was fine, kind of boring, kind of scary. I don't think I get the Bacchae. In brief, the story is about Dionysus, son of Zeus, disguised as a human. He and his followers, the chorus, show up in a town, but the leader of the town, Pentheus, is upset about it. He doesn't understand why all the women are acting crazy, and he arrests Dionysus, not believing him to be an actual god. As punishment, Dionysus possesses Pentheus' own mother with the same madness as his followers, and together, with their bare hands, they rip Pentheus apart. His mom walks back into town holding her son's head, thinking it to be, in her madness, the head of a lion. When she realizes what she's done, she's overwhelmed by her grief and futilely attempts to put Pentheus' mutilated corpse back together. Dionysus returns, basically saying, well, he said I wasn't a god, so that's blasphemous, so he got what was coming to him. Pentheus' mother is exiled. It's incredibly dark. In the reviews, critics called it daring, challenging, a bloody spectacle, a feminist masterpiece. I don't really get what part of a man who's a god possesses women's minds, driving them to murder screams feminism, but hey, I'm a girl who commuted to New Jersey every day for 4 months to do Cats. What do I know? Here's something I do know. The other chorus girls did not like me, and they took their jobs seriously. As we waited to enter for each scene, there is dead quiet in the wings. Usually there's some light joking, maybe quickly running lines, maybe physical warm-ups, shaking out your nerves. I tried to do this once. Before our entrance at the top of the show, we all gathered in the stage right wing, all 12 of us, a perfect and identical dozen. It was a dress rehearsal, no audience. I did a few jumping jacks, trying to hype myself up. Another masked girl grabbed my bicep hard. When I turned, she just shook her head no. Just a simple silent no. We don't do that here. We stand silently in the wings, focusing on our craft, breathing, waiting for our entrance. I never tried it again. When you can't talk to your coworkers, acting becomes a lot less fun. The collaboration element is totally gone, and honestly, the acting element was gone for me too. How am I supposed to find my character or sense of identity in a role when my role is don't let your voice stick out, don't take a wrong step, blend in perfectly with 11 women who dislike you? So before the show, instead of chatting or doing jumping jacks, I wandered the theater. I've always loved theaters. The dramatic architecture, the ornate prosceniums, the stark contrast of backstage, so dark, so dusty. The theater was no Broadway house, but it had a fly system, which we didn't use because the Greeks wouldn't have been able to fly anything in. Just over 300 seats, including a mezzanine. Fancy. Lots of backstage space. I could say more about it because I spent hours during the run of the show wandering, but it wouldn't be terribly interesting to anyone who's not me. But I know it wouldn't be terribly interesting to anyone who's not me. Just know it was a beautiful old theater, and I mean old, built in the 1910s, just before the Great Depression. I used to love imagining how many generations of people had performed on that stage, imagining what they'd think of this show, or what they'd think of me. About a week into my wandering, on some 15-minute break, I was looking at the ladder that led up to the catwalk, a long, thin metal walkway stretching across the stage from above, usually used for hanging lights. I wondered how long it had been since it was used during a show. I wondered if it was even safe. What would the view be like from up there, seeing the entire stage from 30 feet in the air? I slowly looked up the ladder. I wouldn't actually climb it. That would be crazy, right? I'm not particularly good with heights. As my eyes lifted, I made eye contact, or rather, mask contact, with someone. A fellow chorus girl up on the catwalk. I stopped breathing for a second. What was she doing up there? I started to say something stupid, like, "Why are you up there?" when just as quickly as the face appeared, it vanished. I saw her white-robed form retreat down the catwalk, heading for a different ladder, probably. It was weird. Why did she run? Embarrassed to be caught somewhere she shouldn't be? I allowed myself to entertain a little fantasy. Maybe she was just like me. Maybe she also hated the other chorus girls and didn't get the back eye. Maybe she was exploring the theater for fun on our break, enjoying the old architecture like I did. I had no idea who she was under the mask, and she had no idea who I was. She probably thought I was one of the normal judgmental girls and ran off before I could tell on her to the stage manager. I was filled with unfounded hope. Could I make a friend here? Was it possible? After 2.5 weeks of silence from the other girls, it was hard to imagine. How would I find her? How would I let her know it was me, that I had seen her on the catwalk, and we were the same? After that day, I got much more observant. When the director called for a break, instead of immediately retreating into the depths of backstage, I watched my 11 doppelgangers carefully, tracking who went for water, who went back to the dressing rooms, who ran off towards the vending machines. It was hard to tell everyone apart, but people had to take their masks off to drink water eventually. I memorized faces and tried to keep track of them. I started to get a handle on everyone's patterns, narrowing down potential adventurers. It was impossible. 11 people is too many to observe. But I'm an actor. Memorizing crap is literally my job. By week 4, just days from opening, I had 3 potential girls. I tried to stick close to them during rehearsals, picking one to follow each day, but nobody ever wandered towards the catwalk. Maybe the girl, whoever she was, had been scared away from adventuring when I caught her. I started to lose hope. We were opening soon. I should focus on making my entrances, not making friends. But then I saw her again. This time, it was half an hour before the curtain went up for our invited dress rehearsal. The press was there. I was nervous. I knew I had my part down, but when you're doing a show, no matter how prepared you are, there's always the lingering fear that you'll freeze up, forget everything, and ruin everyone's hard work. It just means that you care. I was surprised I cared so much. I still didn't even get the play. I couldn't let the other girls see me weak. I barely show my real feelings to people I care about, much less mean actresses who look down on me. To get away from it all, I wandered down to another unused part of the stage, the orchestra pit. We did have music in the show, but the Greeks didn't have orchestra pits, so it was closed off, being used as storage. I loved it down there. I loved looking through the storage bins, finding props from long-forgotten productions. Sometimes I would find something incredible, something I swore was from the day the theater opened, something old and valuable, and usually I could never find it again. Those bins were a treasure trove. Of all the weird little spaces I found backstage, the pit was my favorite. I felt like a real explorer down there, illuminating my path with my phone flashlight, getting spooked when a mouse ran over my foot. Of course the theater had mice. It was more than 100 years old. And besides, every building has mice in New York City. That day, I wasn't there to look around, just to sit, just to catch my breath. I tiptoed down the creaky steps and plopped myself on the ground, surrounded by bins. I inhaled and exhaled, smelling the mildewy scent of old props on every side of me. That's when I heard a noise. Not a mouse noise. I was used to those. Something bigger. I turned my phone flashlight on immediately, calling, "Hello?" The light landed on a mask, just like mine. Mine, which was currently off because I was doing my breathing exercises. I felt exposed. She could see my face, but I couldn't see hers. I stood up. "You scared me." She didn't respond. She looked at me for a second and started to retreat the other way, towards the stairs at the other side of the pit. "Wait," I called. "I won't tell anyone I saw you." She stopped for a second, but then kept walking. I stood and followed. "Please stop. Can I at least know who you are? I don't fit in with most of the other chorus girls." I reached for her long white toga. I swear I had it in my hand, but somehow she slipped away. I staggered a bit, almost tripped, confused that I hadn't made contact with her costume, and when I looked back up, I only saw a glimpse of her disappearing up the stairs. I tried to follow again, but I found that side of the pit's stairs reached a dead end. I didn't understand how she'd gotten out. And when I looked back down at my phone, it was time for places. Disappointed and defeated, I rushed away to the other stairs, making my way to the stage right wing to wait for my entrance. I counted heads immediately when I arrived. Maybe she hadn't made it back yet. But alas, 12. All accounted for. I nudged a girl next to me subtly. "Who was the last one here besides me?" She just stared at me for a moment, which came off as very creepy through the blank dead stare of her mask. How am I supposed to know? We all look exactly the same. I sighed. "Okay, thanks." "For nothing," I thought bitterly. The invited dress went well. The press liked it, as I've already said. I was distracted the entire time. After that day, I made it a habit to count all the girls when the stage manager called for places. If I was right about this girl, she, like me, would be one of the last, if not the last one there. She'd be wandering, exploring, getting away from the bullies. I wish I hadn't done this. I wish I'd given up when she disappeared on a dead-end staircase. I wish I'd never seen her on the catwalk, because when I started counting heads, I noticed something impossible. Sometimes before we went on, I counted 13 identical masked faces. It was a chorus of 12. It was supposed to be 12. I'd recount again. 13. A chill went down my spine. We all looked the same. Same masks, same togas, same wigs. Who was the imposter? How could anyone be an imposter? It didn't make sense. How would they get into the theater? How would they get a costume? I started counting more often. Between scenes, in the dressing rooms, even on stage during dull moments. It fluctuated. Sometimes I'd count 12 for a whole day, an entire show, and sigh in relief, feeling like some curse was broken. But the next day, at least once, I'd count 13. And it seemed as if one masked pair of eyes was always trained on me. I don't know how she knew it was me. We looked the same, but she'd stare. It felt scary, but it also felt ridiculous. I couldn't be sure it was the same person looking every time. I couldn't be sure it was unlucky number 13, but I felt like it was. I felt a lot of things. I felt like I couldn't tell anyone. The other girls already didn't like me. I couldn't have them thinking I was crazy. And admitting the presence of the 13th would mean admitting to my adventures into forbidden backstage areas. I couldn't lose this job. I was living paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't eating well or sleeping well. Maybe this was all a hallucination. And somehow, my biggest feeling was that if I told someone about the 13th, I'd never see her again. And I needed to see her again. The obsession had only gotten stronger. I knew somehow deep inside that she was the one I had seen on the catwalk and in the orchestra pit. I no longer wanted to be her friend. I wanted to corner her, to ask her who she was and why she was sneaking in as if she was one of us. I wanted to ask what she wanted from me. Because she must want something from me, right? Why else would she stare? Why would she appear only to me? The timing never lined up. The show opened at this point, and I had a job to do. Delighting the audience. I couldn't skip my entrance to catch number 13. The chorus formations would look ridiculous with a missing person, and as much as the other girls hated me, I owed it to them as my co-stars to make them look good. Logically, I knew there was only one person the 13th could be. Catalina, the actress I'd replaced. She must be jealous of me, bitter. Maybe she wanted to take my role like I'd taken hers. It would be insane, but it was all that made sense. She was the only other person who had the costume, who knew the keypad code to get into the theater. She must have recovered from her fall to come and find me. It was almost like a game. It definitely made the show more interesting for me. Before I realized what was happening, I dreaded performances. I felt stupid, taking on this role in a show I didn't even understand. But now I had so much to do, I had to plan. I started showing up early, an hour before my call time. I walked my old spots, thinking I may see her. The other chorus girls were impressed that I was showing up early, thinking it showed some sort of dedication to the show. I think they even started to hate me less. They still detested any attempts at conversation in the wings, but in the dressing room, I started to have a few breakthroughs. In particular, I started a semi-friendship with Erin. Ironically, she had been one of the 3 women I thought might be the 13th, until I realized the 13th wasn't really one of us at all. She was the only person I could actually ask about Catalina. Did she ever say anything about the theater, the building, I mean? Like, did she have a favorite part of it? Erin would laugh at my seemingly random specificity. We weren't close, Michelle. I have no idea what she thought about the theater. Well, what'd she do on her breaks? Erin thought for a second. I don't know. I never saw her at the vending machines or the dressing rooms. I guess she found some quiet place to run lines. That confirmed it for me. A quiet place like the catwalk or the orchestra pit. We were 3 weeks into our 5-week run where I came up with a plan to catch Catalina. It wasn't a great plan, and I had no idea if it would work, but showing up an hour early every day was making me tired and producing 0 results. I needed a new strategy. I realized that after seeing her in the pit, I only ever saw the 13th when all 12 of us were together. So I told a white lie. One night after the show, when everyone was changing in the dressing room, I appealed to my fellow chorus girls. Are you guys busy before the show tomorrow? I innocently asked. I'm feeling a little shaky on some of the entrances. If we could all just get here like 20 minutes before our call time tomorrow, I'd really love to run some stuff with you guys. I've been running it on my own, but without the entire team, I just don't always remember where I fit. To my surprise and intense joy, everyone agreed. They really did seem to respect me more when I looked like I was taking my role seriously. I could barely sleep that night. I was so excited to see if my plan worked. And hey, if it didn't, I had 2 more weeks of shows to think of something else. It was a Sunday night, our last show of the week. Mondays are usually dark days in professional theater, meaning there are no shows that day to give the team a rest. I had planned this on purpose. If I had failed, I had a dark day to reflect on the failure and try again. At 5:40, 20 minutes before our call time, all the girls were assembled and in costume. We started running entrances. After 10 minutes, I thought my plan had failed. We had run our first 3 entrances, and I never counted more than 12 heads in the wings. But around 5:55, as we got to our entrances in Act 2 off stage, I locked eyes with a mask. A 13th mask. I quickly told everyone, "I think I got it, you guys. Thank you so much for coming early." Everyone mumbled that it was no problem and they were happy to help. The 13th mask broke eye contact with me, looking around in confusion, perhaps distress. The girls started to trickle back towards the dressing room. The 13th turned and power walked away. I shoved through the crowd to catch her, not calling out like I had in the past. I knew she didn't respond to that. I knew I had to catch her now or never. Once we were out of the crowd's eye line, I began to run. She ran too. "You're not getting away this time!" I yelled like some kind of cartoon superhero. My adrenaline was pumping and blood rushed to my ears. After I yelled, I suddenly became aware of another set of running feet behind me. "Michelle, where are you going?" It was Erin's voice. "Don't follow me," I hastily called back, picking up speed. The 13th also picked up speed. Though she was running just as fast as I was, she showed no signs of exertion. I couldn't hear her heavy breathing or heavy feet on the floor. It was like she was gliding. It infuriated me. Erin didn't let up. "Michelle, the stage manager is going to wonder where we are." I ignored her. The 13th rounded a corner and I realized where she was going. The catwalk. The ladder. She ascended the rungs rapidly like a spider. I clambered up much less gracefully. Erin's voice had a heavy tinge of concern. "Michelle, what are you doing? It's not safe up there." "Then don't follow me," I yelled back, exasperated. "This is between me and her." Despite my vocal warning, I heard Erin climbing up behind me. Once on the metal rail, I looked both ways, terrified she'd escaped me again. But her white toga was just a few feet away, retreating into the darkness. I lunged at her. The entire catwalk shook. The 13th and I both grabbed the railings to steady ourselves. We met eyes. Or rather, we met masks. "You have nowhere to go," I stated. I heard Erin reaching the top of the ladder behind me. "Michelle, come down, please. You're scaring me." "I can't. I finally have her." I took a step towards the 13th. She took an equal and opposite step back. "Take the mask off," I beckoned her. "I know it's you, Catalina." I felt the rail shake slightly as Erin got on it. "What are you talking about, Michelle?" "She's been sneaking in, Erin. She's been standing in the wings with us before we enter, for weeks." I took another step towards the 13th. In my peripheral vision, I could see how high we were above the stage. 30 feet. You could die falling from that height. "It's not Catalina." "It can't be. Stop this," Erin called, finally frustrated. I turned towards her. "Who else could it be?" Erin had taken her mask off. Her face was streaked with terror. "Catalina died, Michelle. She fell off this catwalk, directly onto her face, and she died. Please come down with me. I don't know who you're talking to, and I don't know what you're trying to do, but it isn't worth it." "What are you talking about? I'm talking to..." I turned back, and she was gone. Vanished like a bad dream. I swear, Erin," I started to say. She was right in front of me. I chased her." I turned back to Erin. The 13th was behind her. It made no sense. Nobody can move that fast. Nobody can be in front of me 1 second and behind me the next. It was inhuman. I stopped speaking. I stopped breathing. It sucks to learn that in a fight or flight situation, My answer is to freeze. Erin must have seen how my face changed. "Michelle," she asked quietly, "what's wrong?" Behind her, the 13th raises a hand to her mask. Her hands were impossibly pale. How had I never noticed that before? She gripped the mask in her hand. Time stretched. It must have only been a second, because Erin didn't move, but it felt like years of my life passed me by as the 13th, inch by inch, raised her mask from her face. Or raised her mask. Because there was no face. Under the mask, pale and gruesome, was a bloody, flat edge. Broken, disgusting. It was impossible to make out eyes or a nose or a mouth. Inside a somewhat face-shaped frame of stark white skin, all I could see was flesh, red and raw, squished in on itself, like someone had fallen from a very high height and landed on their face. By the time I finally began to react, it was too late. The 13th, or Catalina, the ghost, whatever that thing was, it moved its hands from the mask to Erin's shoulders. And it pushed. And she screamed, agonizingly loud, as she flew over the side of the railing. And she screamed for the second or so she was in the air, and I was screaming too. And after the crunch of her body hitting the wooden floor of the stage, everyone else screamed, cast and crew alike. I stared down at her limp form from 30 feet up. Her legs were twisted the wrong way. A pool of blood began to seep out of her. And when I looked up again, I expected the 13th to be gone, but it wasn't. With no eyes, it was also looking down at Erin, at what it had done. And then slowly, it turned towards me. On all fours backwards, I scrambled away from it on the catwalk, terrified, not wanting to be next. The 13th's shoulders shook rapidly like a person laughing, but it made no sound. It never made a sound. Not going up the stairs of the orchestra pit, not when it pushed Erin, and not as it climbed back down the ladder rung by rung. I found myself alone on the catwalk. Erin survived somehow, paralyzed from the waist down. Apparently, she fell on her legs, which, when you're falling from 30 feet up, is a good thing. If she had gone down headfirst, there would have been no chance. The show had to close, of course. When they lost Catalina a few weeks into rehearsal, she was replaceable. But with me refusing to go on and Erin in the hospital, there was nothing to be done. I haven't seen Erin since that day. I feel too guilty. But I was never arrested, so I guess she told the authorities that I didn't push her. I don't know what she told them. I don't know what I would have told them had they asked me. I don't do stage plays anymore. The family I used to nanny for gave me a star-studded recommendation, and now I make my living taking care of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old for another filthy rich family. I still act, but I only audition for film work. I don't even see plays these days. I won't set foot in a theater. If the 13th had vanished off that catwalk, maybe things would be different. Maybe I could chalk it up to an extreme hallucination, some terrifying creature my mind brewed up to cope with the stress of the show and paying rent. Maybe I could even forget its bloody mess of viscera and the vague shape of a face. But I saw it go down that ladder, rung by rung. And I know it's still out there. Erin was unlucky. Erin was a victim of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And if I step inside a theater again, some way, somehow, I know the 13th will get me on another catwalk. This time, I'll be the one going over the railing. And I've never once landed on my feet. Thank you so much for listening to this narration. I hope you enjoyed. A quick thank you to my patrons, Rinku Starr, William Hartley, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, IC Narrates, and Jesse Hartley. Again, thank you all so much for your support. If you've got any prayer requests, feel free to reach out to me on any social media, and I would love to know how I can be praying for you. And also, about each month, I link a different cause in the description to donate money to, people going through some tough surgeries or funds for victims of natural disasters, etc., etc. If you've got a little extra money to give to someone in need, I've got at least one link for you each month in the description. So that's there for you to do that if you feel that you can. Even if it means that you unsubscribe from my Patreon, that's absolutely wonderful. Much love, and thank you guys again for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.